been told you have prediabetes, you might be feeling overwhelmed, but here's the good news. Food is one of your most powerful tools that you can use to manage this condition. I'm Dr. Rebecca Berens. I'm a family physician and founder of Vida Family Medicine, and I've helped hundreds of patients take control of their blood sugar without extreme diets or cutting out foods that they love. In this video, I'm going to talk about some simple, sustainable changes you can make with regards to the way that you eat to better control your blood sugar if you have prediabetes or insulin resistance. There's going to be no gimmicks, just the science-based strategies that actually work. So first of all, I want to explain a little bit about what prediabetes is. So prediabetes is a condition in which your blood sugar is higher than normal, but has not reached the threshold that qualifies for type 2 diabetes. And the underlying problem in prediabetes is insulin resistance. So insulin is a hormone produced by your pancreas in response to when we eat food. And so insulin's job is to take the sugar that is absorbed into your bloodstream from the food that you eat and put it wherever it needs to go in whatever cells of the body need it. So it could be the liver, could be the muscle, could be storage as fat, could be to the brain. All of these things, insulin is required to move sugar from the bloodstream to the organ where it needs to go. If you have insulin resistance, what that means is your body is not responding properly to insulin. So you're producing the insulin, but you're not able to respond to it normally. And so as a result, your blood sugar is higher for longer than it should be. This is different than type 1 diabetes, in which the pancreas is actually not producing insulin, and that's why type 1 and type 2 diabetes are very different from each other. So there's sort of a progression from the condition of insulin resistance to prediabetes, in which the body is no longer able to keep up with insulin response, and therefore the blood sugar goes up. And then at some point that threshold is reached where the blood sugar is high enough that we call it type 2 diabetes. So that's just sort of like a basic explanation of what that means. But essentially, what is happening when you have insulin resistance that has progressed to prediabetes? Your body is unable to adequately process the sugar that you're eating and move it rapidly enough to where it needs to go, so the level of sugar in your bloodstream stays higher for longer than it should. And there's a lot of problems that can happen when you have higher than normal blood sugars, even if they're not in the diabetic range. So one is your body has to produce a higher amount of insulin to be able to get the blood sugar out of the bloodstream because of that resistance. And insulin circulating all the time has some pro-inflammatory or causes inflammation properties. And that's what underlies a lot of the chronic health conditions that people think of: cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke, and those are sorts of things that insulin resistance and prediabetes and type 2 diabetes then contribute to. And so it's a risk that's really serious and has some really serious conditions associated with it. But when you are still in the insulin resistance prediabetes stage, haven't already crossed over the threshold into type 2 diabetes, it is much easier to manage this than it is once your body has kind of gotten burned out with trying to keep the blood sugar low enough with overproducing insulin, and that's when the blood sugars continue to escalate and cause that type 2 diabetes. And so it is a lot easier to manage at this stage. So it's a good stage for us to catch things because we can make smaller, more sustainable lifestyle changes and ideally avoid medication if possible by just making some adjustments to things of our lifestyle. So I'm going to focus today on the food. I'm going to talk about some of the other things in our lifestyle that can affect blood sugar levels and management of prediabetes in future videos. So today I'm just going to be focusing on food. So what happens when we eat food, we release insulin. Insulin takes the sugar out of our bloodstream and puts it where it needs to go. The speed at which we absorb that sugar from our bloodstream is affected a lot by what we eat and how we're eating. So that's why when you always hear, general health advice of eating balanced meals. So what does that mean, a balanced meal? A balanced meal is a meal that includes carbohydrate, which is, what people think of carbs. So those are things that ultimately break down to sugar. And then protein, which is what we think of in things like meat or plant-based proteins, tofu, beans, those sorts of things. Fat, which is coming from things like animal fats, oils, and some oils could be from plant sources, seed sources, a variety of sources. And then fiber, which is, in fruits, vegetables, whole grains. That fiber is what we that kind of fibrous part of the plant usually is what we're thinking of when we're talking about fiber. And so when you eat a meal that is all carbohydrate, there's no protein or minimal protein, no or minimal fat, no or minimal fiber, you absorb that sugar really quickly. So your blood sugar spikes up really quickly because it's fast. That's a fast process to break down carbohydrate and absorb sugar. When there's protein, fat, and fiber also present in the meal at the time that you're eating, that slows the absorption of sugar into your bloodstream because there's more digestion required to break down the protein, the fat, and the fiber, and also the movement of the food out of your stomach and into the digestive tract, the small intestine, the large intestine, is also slower when those other things are there. So that's why you'll feel fuller for longer after you've had a more balanced meal, because it's slower to move through your digestive tract, and then also the absorption of sugar from that meal is slower. And so when you struggle to absorb the sugar out of your bloodstream into your tissues because of insulin resistance, that means that if you have a big spike quickly of your blood sugar, it's going to be really hard for you to overcome that and be able to get the sugar out of your bloodstream. Versus if you have a more slow absorption of blood sugar, you're going to get a curve that's more like this, a gentle up and down. So there's like a big spike if you eat only carbs that again takes a really long time to be able to overcome, or kind of like a more gentle, slow curve that is a little bit easier for your body to overcome. And so that's why those regular balanced meals are really important, and the balance is the key part of that, including all of those nutrients that you need for all the various functions of your body. So it's not a case of cutting out carbs, and this is what I often hear recommended to people who have prediabetes or insulin resistance, is like cut your carbs, stop eating carbs, do keto, do whatever other thing. There's a lot of harms to that, but the biggest thing that I see with patients is that when you cut out carbs, that is our preferred fuel source for our brain and for our body in general. We need carbs. We have to have carbs. Our brains love carbs, and we don't function well in terms of how we're thinking, how we're feeling. All of those things in our brain do not work well when we don't have carbs as our fuel source. So we need to have carbs. And so when you don't eat any carbs, your craving for carbs is going to increase significantly because your body is telling you, I need this, I need this. And so what happens is if you cut out carbs or skip meals entirely even, which is another thing that I hear, your craving for food and carbs specifically is going to go up. And what's going to happen is what is often called the restrict, binge, restrict cycle. So you've restricted, your body is now heavily craving carbs, heavily craving food, and then you're going to have a big overeating episode. And a big overeating episode is a normal response to restriction. Your body has been starved or restricted from the fuel that it needs. And so biologically, the normal thing for your body to do is stock up on that thing next time it's available to make sure that you have the stores available if that happens again. That is just like how we are wired. So it's a very normal process, but it is the worst thing that you could do when you have trouble with managing your blood sugar, because if you eat a very big, heavy meal, and particularly predominantly carb meal, which is often what happens when we have a binging episode, your blood sugar spikes super high, and that is really, really hard for your body to overcome when you're insulin resistant. You're going to stay at a higher blood sugar for longer. Your body's going to dump a bunch of insulin to try to lower that blood sugar level. And what sometimes happens, and you may have experienced this if you have insulin resistance or prediabetes, is it reaches that threshold where the insulin production was so high that your blood sugar starts to drop really fast. And then you get what's called reactive hypoglycemia. So your blood sugar went from being super, super high to super, super low really, really drastically. And you'll feel that brain fog, that tiredness, that kind of anxiety, nervousness, agitation from your blood sugar going down after meals. Or you'll feel really lethargic, really sluggish, really sleepy. And again, really hard to function in your day-to-day life when you're feeling that way. So really important to make sure you're eating those regular balanced meals with all of the nutrients that your body needs, not restricting yourself, not cutting things out completely so that you're craving them excessively at another time, but just giving your body what it needs so that you feel satiated, you feel full, you feel well-fueled, and you have all the things that you need to function at your best. Now, this is not to say that if you eat regular balanced meals and do all of these things, your blood sugar is going to magically become perfect. That is, there's a lot of factors contributing to insulin resistance. Some of them are genetic, some of them are epigenetic, some of them are environmental. There are so many factors that you do not have control over. So I do not mean to say by this that you can 100% control this with food if you just eat a perfect certain way. That's absolutely not the case. But there's a lot that you can do if you're eating, again, consistent, regular, balanced meals, and opting for foods that fuel you and give you what you need rather than restricting yourself and then overeating later. you're much more likely to be able to control your blood sugar. I often recommend people working with a registered dietitian. You know, I'm a physician, I have some nutrition training, but certainly not to the level that a registered dietitian has. And so I often will recommend that patients who have really struggled with eating, you know, maybe they didn't have a lot of education about nutrition growing up, maybe they suffered from food insecurity growing up, and so they have a lot of difficulty around planning, managing meals, cooking, shopping. There's a lot of things that people just don't learn depending on their upbringing and their circumstances. And a registered dietitian is a perfect person who can help educate you more deeply on these topics and help give you tips to help you eat more balanced and more regularly in a way that's going to be supporting how your body works. And then, of course, again, there are people who, even having done all of this the best they can, are still going to struggle, and that is okay. Again, there's other factors that contribute to that. It's not just your habits that affect the outcome here. So if you're doing everything that you can and you're still struggling, we do have medications that can help with this, and that's definitely something to talk about with your doctor. But if your goal is to avoid medication if possible, I definitely recommend starting with some of these strategies, and again, avoiding those sort of gimmicky fad diet, cut out this, skip this. Those are just not helpful psychologically, and they're not helpful physiologically in the way that your body functions either. So I hope this was helpful. If you have questions, please drop them in the comments. And like I said, I'm going to talk in future videos about some other strategies you can use that are not food related to help manage prediabetes or insulin resistance.